Oh my God. This is like two guys comparing dick sizes, although we're comparing credit card rewards. Here we go. This is the battle royale now, people.
Welcome to Unqualified Opinion, where the content is as interesting as the bottom of your toilet. How's it going, Scott?
Speaking of toilets, so I have been feeling very bloated over the last 6 months. And I went to the doctor for my annual physical, and I told this to him, and he said, "Have you changed your diet?" I was like, "No." It's like, "Do you have a history of stomach issues?" I'm like, "Yeah, I've always had a very sensitive stomach." He's like, "Well, what often is a trigger for people who just have a history of very sensitive stomachs is one of 6 sugars. And the sugars, or the things that can ferment, it's called FODMAP, FODMAP, and each letter stands for a different one of those sugars. And so the diet it's a bit of an elimination diet. You cut all of that out. So essentially I'm eating chicken and brown rice because everything has it in it. And then you do that for 3 weeks, and you start adding in things you really like, and trying to find that trigger point. So I have been feeling so good. I'm hungry because I can't eat a lot of things, so it's like a lot of the same foods I'm eating, but I'm not bloated anymore. It was pretty amazing transition. So I feel very good. And now, the challenge is you're not supposed to stay on this diet because you're missing out on nutrients that is in all these other foods you can't eat. But you have to figure out which one of the 6 sugars triggers your symptoms. So you kind of add they're called sugars. They're not really sugars. They're chemical compounds. You add one in the time until you find which one and which quantity really bothers you, and then you cut that out. So essentially what the problem is now really is I'm gluten-free. Gluten's not one of them, but there is one of these sugars that's very common in things that have gluten in them. So I can eat sourdough because there's something in the fermentation that kills the sugar, but I can't eat anything else that has gluten in it. And it is a bitch.
So what can you eat besides brown rice and chicken?
Any meat. Any meat I can eat. Okay. Any fat is fine.
But this is why I think a lot of people feel really good after the carnivore diet, right? Because people who do the carnivore diet say that they also feel a lot better, and I think that the reason for it is just because it's a basic elimination diet and the way that what you're doing is. Have you felt any other effects other than just reduced bloating?
No. It's just, no.
Do you feel better overall, like mood, clarity, sleep?
No, I've been kind of grumpy lately.
Really? Isn't that just your standard MO?
Yes, sort of is, but I can't eat those cookies in the break room at work.
Oh,
I get grumpy.
Well, this is a perfect opportunity for you to kind of get yourself unaddicted to those sugars.
I am. It's a cleanse. So yeah. Anyway, that's speaking of toilets, but I think this could be another topic for a different time. I don't know if we've done diets or not, but regardless, today. Wait, what are we talking about today?
Oh, we're going to talk about personal finance.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Right. I forgot that. Personal finance.
Do you want to do drinks first?
Oh, yeah. Well, I have a story about that too, so you go ahead.
Okay, so I'm just going to put this into view so that you can see what I'm doing here. So I got this.
Oh, it looks gross already. It's something great. Ladies and gentlemen, let me describe what you're looking at. You're looking at a water bottle full of bloody pee. You're looking at a glass with a spoon in it that is a noxious green color with residue around the rim that's also green. You're looking at something that is bright yellow in a tin hiking cup. I think it's turmeric. And then, of course, a glass of straight whiskey.
That's actually not whiskey, but good guess.
Whatever.
So
whatever it is.
my
Bourbon,
goal
I don't know.
today is to get
Ugh.
as drunk as I always do, but also
So
not have a hangover
gross.
in the morning. So that's why I have all these different things in front of me. So what I have
He's nuts.
is it's a coffee rum
Oh,
from a place
boy.
called Cotton and Reed. It's a distillery, rum distillery in DC. And that's the only alcoholic drink that I have here. But I have all these other drinks which are going to help me prevent my hangover for two reasons. One, because I'm getting electrolytes and you'll see why, but also because it forces me to drink other things as well, and so I stay hydrated. So I've got two different drinks that are made from powders from Organifi, and they are the gold powder and the green powder. And the gold powder is just kind of like a hot tea that has turmeric and a bunch of other things in it. And then the green one is just kind of like your standard green smoothie powder. And then
What is standard green smoothie powder? I've never heard of green smoothie powder. It is not a normal thing, Steve.
it's like a general smoothie that you get, like a green smoothie or whatever, but in powdered form. So you just buy it in the powder.
Right. So
then-
instead of using a blender, you buy it in a powder. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, instead you buy
that's
it for 5 times
grotesque.
as much in a powder instead of buying
That's
the vegetables.
grotesque.
Yeah. So that's what I have.
That sounds really nutritious.
So the green powder is, I don't know, it's okay, goes down. But really what I'm excited about is my 32-ounce water bottle full of Pedialyte, which I'm just very happy that I have, considering how much of this rum I'm going to drink. The rum that I have is a coffee rum that tastes so good that you just can't tell how much of it you're drinking. And I think it's like 32%, so it's not a full 40%, but it's still really strong, and yet you can't tell. It's just so good. It just tastes like a cold coffee drink, like a liqueur.
Do you think the people who spent a lot of time crafting that liqueur, that rum, thought, you know what, this is going to go really well with some green smoothie powder and turmeric?
They probably didn't think it, but damn, does it go well together.
They'd fall over dead if they looked at what you're doing with their rum right now.
Oh no, it's terrible. It's terrible. This is an experiment. We're gonna see if I feel better from it, and we're gonna see if this becomes a regular thing. But I'm just testing it out, seeing if I have more additional drinks, if it'll
So
help
that's
me
not
out.
a lot of rum. That's not enough for a hangover.
This amount? Well, it was a full glass when we started.
What? You've drank an entire water glass? You're going to drink an entire water glass of rum?
No, not a. I mean, like a whiskey glass of rum.
It was like filled up to the brim.
How about there?
Oh my god.
So that's why I have all these other drinks.
Jesus Christ. You're fucking insane. Okay, we can talk about Steve's wacky ideas about health another time, because I have a thing or two to say about them.
The all or nothingness of it?
Yes, and also the quack science of it.
What do you mean Pedialyte is solid? Pedialyte always helps with hangovers.
I want to find you find me a peer-reviewed study that's replicable, that actually, and I will read it. Find it, and send it to me.
About Pedialyte specifically?
Yes.
Or about the consumption of electrolytes and how that reduces hangovers?
I still am not entirely sure about the electrolyte hangover relationship, but
That's fair. I haven't researched it, so I don't know what I'm talking about. It's called unqualified opinion for a reason.
no shit. Oh my god. Okay, so I'm drinking. So I went to the store and I got this whiskey, and it was slightly stronger proof. It just said, like, there was something on the bottle that suggested that it was. I don't know what the title. I don't know what it was. But it was on sale, which is why I got it. Because I'm cheap. And well, it does taste very good, and it's Bullet, which is it's okay. And I realized today, well, I thought it was going to be like, 90 proof, slightly stronger. No. It's not 90. It's not 100. It's not 110. It's not 120. It's 125 proof.
Well, that's efficient.
And I will tell you, for 125 proof whiskey, it's actually really good.
So maybe you're the one that needs all this Pedialyte ingredients.
Well, I thought this is really bad, but it's bad. It would be bad if it was only 80 proof because it's not smooth.
It's just so strong.
And I've been drinking this and I'm like, wow, this gets me really drunk, and I never thought to look. Yeah, yeah, it gets me drunk for a reason. It's 50% stronger than a typical alcohol, so more than that. So anyway, I'm drinking that, and then I have a little mint plant outside that I'm growing, so I'm making a mint julep. And just so that when I finish this one, I don't have to go fuss around making another one, I've prepped it with the liquor, the sugar, and the mint in the refrigerator. So all I have to do is add the ice and stir. So it's ready to go.
Great. I'm glad you
ready
were thinking
to
ahead.
Pre-mixed.
Perfect.
But only one shot in it this time. This has more than one shot in it. Quite a bit more than.
Quite a bit more. Are we talking like 2 shots?
Oh, more than 2 shots. More than 2 shots.
More than 3 shots?
About 3 shots. Yeah.
About 3 shots. Great. Which really comes
so
out to 4.5 shots.
4.5 shots.
I'm glad we're doing this on Sundays. Yeah. Real smart.
I have to get up early tomorrow.
I don't know. My Monday schedule has definitely been shifted back about 30 minutes. Whenever we do
Unfortunately, I have like an 8:30 meeting, a 9 o'clock meeting tomorrow. So let's start.
Okay.
Let's cut to the chase.
All
what
right.
are we talking about again?
You keep forgetting. All right. So for this episode, we're going to be talking about personal finance, specifically what we do around saving money, planning for the future, various investments. And I guess we'll just kind of get started. So, Scott, what is your strategy when it comes like kind of paycheck to paycheck? So you get a paycheck in. What is the first step in terms of how you look at that money and what you decide to do with it?
Unlike some people, I don't fixate around payday, which means I kind of have enough where I can always spend what I need to spend on what I want to buy within my limits, regardless of where I am in the pay period. So that's number one. So when I see the paycheck come in, I look because I have a zillion different deductions, and I recently got a pay raise, so I kind of check how much it is, and it's always kind of shifting, and I kind of check into why it's shifting or if it's out of whack. It never is, but I just kind of like to check that. And then I have a cash flow. I am pretty tight because I put a lot of it into savings, not in my bank. So I have to be pretty tight with my cash flow. I keep very little in my savings account, under 500. Sometimes
in your checking
sometimes
account?
Sometimes under 100. And
are you afraid of overdraft fees?
No, because my cash flow is all marked out. Because I have all of my fixed costs, and I never use my debit card.
Do you budget out your fixed costs? Do you have a spreadsheet which tells you?
Well, I know exactly what they will be and when they will be and how much they'll be. It's utilities, it's mortgage, it is a couple other internet, a couple other random. Actually, internet's my charge card. A couple other random things, and same time every day, every date of the month. So you know exactly when the money comes in, when the money goes out, exactly how much you need. And when it gets like above $500 in excess, I transfer that to my investments.
Wow! So every time your checking account goes to like $1,000, say you'll say, "I'm just going to take $500, throw it right into a savings account."
Sometimes even like $700. And if I have to get money out, it overdrafts to my credit card, and it's like a $10 fee. So if it's an emergency, I just go get cash. It charges to my credit card, and it's only a $10 fee. So it's like, I mean, that's never happened.
So that's never happened. So
No.
you really have this locked down. Because when I think about the buffer that I give myself, it's significantly more. I try to always have at least $2,000 to $3,000, preferably more than $3,000 in my checking account, and depending on when I get paid, it fluctuates somewhere between $2,000 and $6,000. And I'm most comfortable when I have at least $3,000 in there, just because I never know what potential expenses I might have, and so I want to have that buffer of say I need to, for instance, like fly back home or pay a big expense that I just wasn't expecting, like a medical expense or something like that.
So let's put that in terms of, so we've talked about this before. Steve makes quite a bit of money. So how big is your paycheck? Like that goes into your bank account?
Like the actual dollar
The
amount?
actual dollar amount, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'm okay saying that. Like 3,000, low 3,000s. It's equivalent of always having roughly one paycheck's worth of money inside my checking account, given a paid period of 2 weeks at a time, or twice a month, whatever that kind of breaks down into. And so I have that kind of just as a buffer, and generally I don't do a good job, and I probably should do better, of explicitly budgeting things out. I have a general sense of what all of my expenses are, and I'll regularly audit my list of expenses about once a month to make sure there's nothing that I'm paying for accidentally that I shouldn't be paying for, like an extra Showtime subscription because I was watching a season of Billions and I really wanted to see that on Amazon Prime. I'll make sure to, if I see that come up as an expense next month and it's like I'm not using Showtime anymore, then I'll just make sure to cancel it, right? So always keeping a good, a sense of what's coming in there at least once a month, but generally just being more loosely cognizant of the fact that if I'm dipping below 3,000, I should be spending less money. And then I have a bunch of automated transfers out once I receive that money in my paycheck, and so that's the other reason why I keep that buffer, because I have a weekly transfer of $400 to a savings account. And if I let that, one paycheck's worth of money kind of get significantly lower, then that $400 draining out every week might become a serious problem, right? I might end up hitting overdraft fees, so I just want to be aware of that. And then I have whatever the max is for every 2 weeks that you can have pushed out to a Roth IRA. And so I have those kind of just streaming out as well.
So just to put this in context, so we're talking like personal finance for like rich and quasi-wealthy, which is the top like 20% for America right here. So this conversation is not going to relate, unfortunately, to a lot of people.
Hopefully, when we dig into behavioral patterns, some of it will become useful.
So I think some of it will, but I just want to just be transparent about that it is pretty different in terms of having a savings and being able to save at all versus most people.
Yeah, we are in a smaller minority of people who have the opportunity to be able to leverage savings accounts and have spare income and have the capacity to set that aside and not have to use right away. So
this is a very quick story that was actually very enlightening for me the other day, and I think this is important because it kind of frames this conversation. So everyone thinks that they're not rich. It's a psychological thing. So the New York Times did something that's really interesting. They had a calculator out, and instead of looking at how you compare to everybody, it asked you, one, where do you live? And then it asks, what would you classify as rich? And it said the top, out of all the Americans, would you say everyone above 50% is rich? Like 50% income and higher. Or would you say it's 40% and higher, or the top 30%, or the top 20%, and go up and up and up. And when I did it, I was like, I'm curious. And then you put your income in.
Mm-hmm.
You put your annual income in and your age. And then, so I think I clicked like everyone making above 20%, like 20% and higher would be rich versus the other 80%. And I put my income in as my city. I am not rich, but I'm damn near close to being rich for someone my age. So I was like top 30% and for my age group. So I wasn't, it's like you wouldn't consider yourself rich, but you're close.
Interesting.
And I'm like, wow, because, that's the whole thing about wealth. It's based on your perception on where you are. So it asks you, what is your perception? And then it tells you based on your perception if you would consider yourself wealthy or not.
That's interesting because if you just straight up ask someone, do you think you're rich? I bet you 98% of people will say I'm not rich.
You're not.
No matter if you are making $20,000 a year or $200,000 a year, people tend to assume that, to get used to what they're making. It's the whole hedonic treadmill thing, right? And then
it's very interesting.
Oh, I could always have more. And since I'm always in want of more, I must not actually be rich.
Yeah. So anyway, I know that's interesting. I do want to bring it up just because I'm someone in policy. Income inequality is something we talk about every single day. And it wouldn't feel genuine to talk about this conversation without acknowledging where Steve and I are coming from.
Yes.
So
that's very fair to say. So where do you save your money?
So I have I have multiple. So I'm a government worker, so I have a pension. So 6.5% of my pre-tax income goes every paycheck to my pension. 1% of my income pre-tax goes to my healthcare savings account, which is different than an FSA or an HSA. It is an account that you can't use until you leave the county or retire, whichever is sooner. So essentially, it is a separate savings account that you cannot use for your future need. And
specifically based around healthcare, though.
I mean, it could be like retirement home. It could be anything like that. So, and you can you can actually choose the asset allocation in this account. So I put mine into quite risky assets because I have many, many, many years to go until I retire. So it's actually it's very much like just a traditional brokerage account where you can choose your allocations. So 1% of my income, so that's 7.5% of my income pre-tax there that goes to that. Another 1% goes to my health savings account, or FSA, flexible spending account, which can be spent on any medical things. So that's 8.5% of my pre-tax income. Now, when you look at that amount compared to the post-tax, it's actually much higher. It's probably closer to 15, upwards of 20% is going to that savings automatically. I can't control that. That's just happens. So on top of that, and that's managed by the state and other government organizations. And on top of that, I have my Roth IRA, which I max out every year. This year it's $6,000. You can put up to $6,000, so I put that in every year. And then I have just a typical brokerage account for short-term expenses that I anticipate in the next year or two.
A brokerage account? Can you explain what that is?
If you want to, for example, if you want to buy mutual funds or ETFs, which are exchange-traded funds, it doesn't really matter what they are, but it's another type of stock/mutual fund thing. If you want to buy stocks, bonds, whatever, you have to have a brokerage account, which is where you conduct the trading, so to speak. I don't really trade. I buy and hold of these funds. Now, that's very risky. Now, my retirement account, I have an index, or actually target date retirement funds. So just very quickly, those target date retirement funds, I say I'm going to retire in 2055. There's a Vanguard fund, target date 2055. It has a very aggressive asset allocation right now. And then it has a glide path over time. It has a glide path, which is essentially the path in which the percentage of bonds to stocks changes. So as you get older and older and older, you get more bonds and fewer stocks. Mm-hmm. It's called this glide path. Now, it's based on my retirement age of 2055. So I don't have to do any rebalancing or any adjustments to my holdings over time. It does it for me. And it's cheap.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't have one of those. How are the fees relative to other ETFs or index funds?
Oh, very small. Very small.
Okay, so relatively equivalent to, say, like the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index fund?
Yeah, very equivalent.
It's
not actively managed. It's a computer formula. It's a formula. It's a program.
Okay.
That is predetermined to shift your allocation over time. It is not actively managed. That's important. Just very, very quickly, actively managed means there's actually like a human being deciding which stocks to sell and which stocks to buy.
Yeah.
Passive is just like it's pegged to like the S&P 500, and it just buys a bundle of stocks that equates to the S&P 500 and just holds them over time. And passive management is what I do.
Yeah, and I think that most people, at least for retirement funds, should always look toward passive investment because the fees are naturally going to be lower because it's not like your money is going to support the incomes of all of these stock traders. It's been shown over time that in general, when you index to the market, you tend to beat actively managed funds just because of the combination of the fact that the fees are going to eat up significantly more than people realize into your overall profits, and because of the fact that the complexity of the market in the current day is so vast and difficult to comprehend that individuals are just as likely to make massive mistakes as massive wins. So
the stock market is almost impossible to predict. I mean, yet you have computers that can help, but some of the smartest people have equated the stock market to almost random. Now, it's not entirely random, but it's close to random because you have events that occur that literally you can't predict.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would have a tendency of saying something like, well, clearly it makes sense for me to buy Amazon because Amazon's valuation is going to keep going up. But the thing that people don't realize is that the expected value of the rise in, say, Amazon is factored into the current price of the stock. So everybody's thinking that. And when you think about what are the best stocks to buy, you're not talking about what's the current value of a company versus its expected future output. It's what is the current value of this stock, which factors in people's conception of what expected future output is, and do you have an edge that gives you information that 99.99% of other people don't have. And the fact of the matter is that 99.99% of us don't have that information that the rest of us don't have, right? And so it's practically impossible, especially as like a random Joe Schmo like one of us, to be able to gather that kind of insight and gather consistently over a extended period of time and an extended number of trades. And so it just makes a lot more sense considering the time and effort and the variability to just go with an index fund and just have your money grow with the rest of the market.
No, it's fun to trade, but it's really stupid. And yeah, you can get lucky. I mean, you can always get lucky. There's stories all over the place. People get lucky and they make millions of dollars. And
Bitcoin.
It's Bitcoin, and then they lost millions of dollars if they thought it was going to keep going up. I mean, that's my strategy, and then I have the rest of it goes to my savings account. My savings account is a money market fund.
What is that?
To be perfectly honest, I'm not going to answer that because I don't exactly know how a money market fund functions, but it is based on the government securities, I think, or some government collateral that has a very predictable and reliable rate of return. It's low.
What is the percent that you get?
2 or 3%. So it's much, much, much higher than a savings account. The big difference between a savings account and a money market fund is a savings account is FDIC insured. A money market is not. Now, a money market doesn't really go down.
Okay. I didn't know that it wasn't FDIC insured, which for people who don't know means that if you lose up to $100,000 because the company kind of goes bankrupt or something like that, then your money is insured. The bank goes bankrupt, sorry. Then your money is insured and you are guaranteed by the federal government to get that money back up to, again, I think $100,000, right?
Right. So money market, because you're actually buying something, or a very small piece of something. It isn't FDIC insured, but it is, and partly because there is that inherent underlying risk, it pays a higher rate.
And what company do you use?
Vanguard.
Vanguard. Okay, so Vanguard has a money market account, which is what you use.
Everyone has money market accounts.
Oh, okay.
Vanguard is, for those of you who don't know about Vanguard was started by Jack Bogle many years ago, and his philosophy was passive investing, low fees. And Vanguard, the entire company was built around this.
Didn't he invent the idea of index funds?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Or was very instrumental in that. And he built this company, and it is now one of the biggest, if not the biggest, holders of money for retirement specifically in the entire world, because it is safe and it is cheap and it is reliable. So that's where my money is, and they have a very good money market fund because it's very low fees, like 0.02% or something like that, and then a pretty good rate of return for something that's very, very safe. So that's where that's my savings account.
Interesting.
So I don't have my savings account in Bank of America, which is where I bank.
What percent of your take home would you say is going to savings in general?
Well, okay, so let's just do a quick math. So let's just say I make $70,000 thereabouts. I'm going to choose that because it's an easy number. I am going to multiply that by 0.065, so that's 4,500, and then there's 6,000 for the Roth IRA, which Steve, you should talk about in a second about what that is.
Yeah.
And then there is I'll say 700 for that, and then I would say I save another 4,000 on top of that. So that is 7 plus 5 people. That is 12.
12%?
No. And then 4, 6, 10, 14, 15. Wait, that's not. That's really bad at math. I'm going to use my calculator, not do long addition.
Did you say long addition? I don't think that's a thing.
15,000. So of my take home is maybe 55,000. I save so it's 15 divided by 55, 27% of my take home, plus my mortgage, which a percentage of that is also my principal.
Yeah, so goes to equity in the house.
So 30%. 30%.
Wow. I would, I don't actually know the numbers, but I'm guessing you are saving more than the vast majority of people, especially
3 times average.
Is average 10%?
It's or less. Yeah.
Probably even less, I would guess. Wow, that is a lot. I will say that you're definitely saving more than me in percent. You might even be saving more than I am.
Which would be very impressive because you make a lot more than I do.
Wow. So I guess I can go through my breakdown. So like Scott, I also max out my Roth IRA. And so I guess one thing that we should probably talk about, and I'm not very informed on any of these investment vehicles. And so I'm just speaking as a layperson in terms of my experience. So Scott, whenever I get anything incorrect, please jump in and correct me. But for the basic day-to-day Joe Schmo, the difference between an IRA and a Roth IRA is that an IRA, you put your money in pre-tax, and then when you take it out post-tax, you get taxed on the gains as an income tax for your income level at the time when you take it out. And you have to be, I think, whatever retirement age is, 65, 70, something like that. For a Roth IRA, you put the money in post-tax, so after you've already been taxed, and you don't get taxed on any of the gains. Yeah, so the benefit of a Roth IRA is that when you take it out, no matter what your income is, you're going to get the same amount of money out, and you also know exactly what you're going to get out of it when you take that money out, right? With an IRA, you are going to be taxed on those gains when you take the money out. And I'm not even sure if you're taxed on the principal as well. I think you might be taxed on the principal when you take it out
because
as well.
you
didn't pay taxes on it,
pay
right?
tax on it.
Yeah, and this the reason why some people do say that an IRA is a
You know
good
what?
idea,
I don't think you're taxed on the
I think you are. Could you look it
no,
up?
you are taxed on the principal.
Uh-huh.
You are not taxed on the gains. Because look at the Roth IRA, right?
Yeah.
You aren't taxed when you take it out. You aren't taxed on anything. That means you aren't taxed on the gains. It's the same. It's just the principal. It's just the principal you're taxed on. Because otherwise, Steve, why would you?
No. I'm looking at Investopedia right now. Most money withdrawn from a traditional IRA is taxed at your current tax rate, which could be as high as some random rate. Any capital gains on the earnings in your IRA account do not benefit from lower capital gains tax treatment. They are taxed at the same rate as regular income. So okay. I wanted to get into this specifically because I wanted to talk about something that I did that I recommend people don't do, right? So with an IRA, people will tell you that there's a benefit to an IRA because what you're getting out of it is you're getting to put the money in pre-tax, and then you make gains on that money that hasn't been taxed yet. So you're able to put more money in because it's before tax, and you're able to leverage that to be able to make more gains. So if you put $15,000 in versus $20,000 in, you're going to make more money off of $20,000 than $15,000, and you're deferring to have to pay the taxes on that. And then when your income goes down when you retire, your income bracket is lower, so you're essentially getting taxed at a lower rate than when you put the money in. That's what people will tell you. This is bogus. Here's the problem. If you're taking your money, you're putting in an IRA, you're going to be taxed as an income tax, right? So whatever your income is when you take the money out. Now, given our modern economy, who knows if you will or will not be working a job when you are, quote unquote, at retirement age and can take that money out. There's a good chance if you're anyone that's like either Scott or I, that you might actually still be working a job and be getting income, right? In which case you're being taxed at a very high rate. A capital gains tax is going to be a flat, I believe it's 15% or something like that. And if you have any other kind of investment, it's going to be taxed when you withdraw at a capital gains tax of 15%. So if you're starting to put money into a retirement account, which is going to be taxed as something that's guaranteed to be higher than a capital gains tax, then all you're doing is choosing to have your money taxed higher than if you just didn't go with a retirement plan and you invest in a standard brokerage account. Because then you're going to be taxed at a capital gains account. So
it can make sense to invest in an IRA if you're at the peak of your earnings. So for example, like an average person, they've been, they're hitting their 50s. They've hit kind of the peak of their work. They work in, let's say we're back in the 90s. They work in a manufacturing plant, relatively high wages. They're making, $70,000, $80,000. And that's kind of the peak of their income in the 90s. And they want to have that nice retirement. They want to live off their savings. They're not going to have a lot of the same costs they do. People's costs in retirement generally are lower. And so for someone like that, which, most Americans go through that stage, an IRA makes more sense because you're making less money in the future and therefore will have a lower income tax than you are right now. So that makes sense in that case, in most cases, to do the IRA for financially reasons.
So for a year, I was getting a 401k from my company that was not giving any sort of match. So I was putting in money, getting no match from the company, and then what would happen with this is that it would get taxed when I retire at an income tax level rather than capital gains tax level. That's both what I put in and any gains that I make. So in the future, I will be paying whatever my income tax is when I choose to withdraw that money after a certain retirement worthy age, right? Now, this isn't really useful if you have the option of just opening a brokerage account and investing in those same funds yourself, right? It made sense at a time where it was really difficult as an individual to not have that option for personal investment. But if I can open up a personal investment account, get a capital gains tax of 15% on anything that I put in, and not have to deal with the shenanigans of an income tax on my investment gains, then why would I ever choose to be taxed on my income tax, which is what a 401k will do, unless I'm getting a company match, in which case I'm getting free money. And so I wasn't getting any free money, so that wasn't useful. So to reiterate, my advice is, in a 401k, if it's not a Roth 401k, right, which is a thing apparently, and I don't know anything about it, if you're getting a 401k, pay up to whatever the company matches, but don't pay more, because that's going to be all of that money and whatever you gain from it is going to be taxed at an income tax level, which for 99% of people is going to be higher than a capital gains tax. I used to put money into a 401k. I've stopped doing that since I've realized, with no match, there's no real value there, in my opinion, in my less than professional opinion. And what I've been doing is just I've set up an automated transfer to take a set amount of money, which in my case is $400, and move it into an account with Ally Bank, which is a high interest savings account. And it was interesting to hear from Scott about his money market account, because the Ally Bank account that I have is actually FDIC insured and gives a 2.1%. They recently went from 2.2 down to 2.1% return on your money annually. And so I'm not sure how a high interest savings account works, but one recommendation is don't use a standard bank's savings account, right? If you have $10,000, 2.1% interest gain, you're not going to make a lot of money, right? Like it's not really worth it. But at the same time, over time, that'll compound and it'll be useful, and it's a good practice to get into. And I think that's part of why I have that automated transfer out, right? Is to, one, not have to think about it, and also just kind of get used to the process of taking some money and putting it aside and trying to save it. And so I think at the end of the day, I definitely have been saving significantly less than you have, Scott. I've been trying to get better.
Percentage-wise,
yeah. I don't want to suffer through all the math that you attempted, but $400 a week comes out to what, like something like...
Well, definitely percent. Let's not go through all the math, but it's a lower percent. It's probably 20% maybe, just from what I know, how much you have.
Sure, yeah, something like that. Plus the Roth IRA amount, and then occasionally, if my checking account gets pretty high, like $6,000 or something, I'll take a few $1,000s out of there, and then I will do some kind of like play money thing with it, right? And so in the past, what I've done is I've gone on Coinbase and I bought Bitcoin when it was at about, what was it, like $6,000 right after the big crash when it went up to 20,000. And then I also bought Ethereum around the same time, and Ethereum has just gotten worse and Bitcoin's gotten better. I think Bitcoin's back up to like 10 or 11 now. But they've canceled each other out. And now I think I put, it was a small amount of money. I think I put $3,000 into a Coinbase account and put half of it into Bitcoin, half of it into Ethereum. And I now have $2,800 because Ethereum's just gone to shit and then Bitcoin's gone up. But Bitcoin hasn't gone up high enough to counteract what's happened to Ethereum. Another play investment that I did was I got into the idea of having gold. And so I purchased a bunch of physical gold. What I didn't go in and buy random jewelry because that would be stupid. Instead, what I did was I bought gold U.S. Treasury coins on JM Bullion, I think it's called. And it's kind of scary to do because each coin is, I think the current rate is like 1,500. And you pay it and then they ship it to you. And if you live in DC, that's terrifying. But I've done that, and I've gathered a few pieces of gold, which I store in an undisclosed location. I think the idea of having gold seems pretty stupid to people, especially the idea of having physical gold. And I'll grant that it doesn't make maybe that much sense, except to say that I do have a bit of just a fascination in the physical object itself. Being able to hold one in my hands and feel the solid gold is just somehow pleasurable to me. But there's the other factor of gold in general as an investment not correlating with the rest of the market. So all of your other investments are going to be highly correlated with each other. And so if there's some kind of downturn within the market, everything basically kind of tanks. And so if you have something that doesn't correlate with that market, then that might be able to retain some value. And so I have less than 10% of everything that I've invested ever in gold in some shape or form, whether that's physical gold or some kind of gold investment fund. But it is something that I am aware of and have kind of at the back of my mind of have this other investment that doesn't follow the same trajectory as everything else. That does kind of go back to also my Roth IRA, where rather than how Scott probably more intelligently and less stressfully just puts all his money into one Vanguard fund that manages it for him, I also use index-based ETFs, but I purchase a random allotment of them. I have some in a high interest savings ETF, and I have some in the total stock market, as well as an emerging markets fund, which has been doing terribly. And I've just kept losing money on that, and I've kept putting in more money because I'm like, hey, look, it keeps going lower. I might as well put more money into it. And it hasn't really panned out. And then I've been trying to figure out what my next option there was going to be. And the reason I do that is because if I'm looking at an investment fund that's going to, only really matter to me many decades from now, I might as well just have a little fun with it and play around. The risks are pretty low at 28.
Well, the risks are compounded.
I don't like to think about that. So what do you want to talk about now, Scott?
So I want to ask you, credit card or debit card?
Credit card. 100% credit card. I really don't understand why people would opt to not use a credit card. Because as long as you set up your automatic payments, you have a general sense of how much you're using, and you don't try to pay when you can't pay it, and you don't try to buy something when you can't really afford it, there is nothing but upside to having a credit card. So the credit cards that I have, I'm going to see if I can find them. This is actually a really good topic. I don't know where I put my credit cards.
Steve is searching for his wallet.
I'm searching for my wallet. Give me a second. I have to find it. Okay, so for credit cards, I have the Chase Freedom Unlimited card, which I think is like 1.5% cash back on everything, and then they have one of those little promos when you first get it that gives you a bunch of miles, as long as you use like $3,000 or something like that. And the miles are really good for travel. So I'm going to be taking a trip in a couple weeks to LA for a high school reunion. Not from LA, the reunion is there. Then flying up to Seattle, and then backpacking in Glacier, flying back to DC from Seattle. And all of that is going to be on these miles, and it's all going to be free, which is great. And then the other one that I recently got, and I really like this card, like how it feels, it's so substantial and nice, is the Amazon Prime card. So there's this Amazon Prime card, and it's like this nice chic black like weighted card. It's got this like good weight to it where it feels like I feel like a professional when I pull this card out.
Until people see Amazon Prime written on it.
Exactly. But it's 5% cash back on any Prime purchases. And I make a lot of Prime purchases because I purchase a lot of supplements. And then, and basically, like, most of the miscellaneous things that I need. I bought, like, inner tubes for a bike tire on Amazon instead of going to a store. You know? And then 2% cash back on restaurants. And then 1% cash back on everything else. So, even outside of Amazon purchases, it's still better for restaurants than my other Chase Unlimited card is. So it's actually a really good deal, this Amazon card. And it makes you feel like a boss because it's substantial and thick and heavy and weighted. So that's what I do. I think the idea of using debit cards instead, unless I'm misinformed about some kind of benefit with debit cards, is just really stupid. And that's just what people do if they just don't trust themselves to be able to spend within their means. Because there are so many benefits having a credit card.
A lot of people use debit cards,
but you don't get to build a credit. You don't get to build your credit history if you don't.
This is an issue. But one of the facts of living in this country with so many people living paycheck to paycheck is when you're in that situation, a debit card can make it a lot easier to manage your money. And if you think about the time thinking about money as a cost, and if a debit card makes that easier to think about, if it's like, if I don't have the money, I literally can't spend it, rather than thinking, oh, I have to check, if I buy this in a credit card, I'm going to have enough, you know, it makes it easier. It makes it cognitively easier for someone who doesn't have a lot of money.
That's fair.
So I think
one thing I will say that to help myself out, and again, I recognize that this is not what the majority of people can afford to do. And so this probably wouldn't resonate with a lot of people. But what I do is, one, I set up automatic payments on my credit cards. But then two, I never let the automatic payments actually go through. I always pay it before that time, and I always pay the full outstanding balance. There's usually an option on the site when you're looking at the card where it's like your latest statement balance, the minimum payment, or the outstanding balance, like beyond your latest statement balance. And I will always pay the outstanding balance, and I have just kind of a timer to check every 2 weeks so that I'm never hitting that actual limit, and then I'm making sure to always pay it in full. And what that also forces you to do is, if you get a credit card, you never want to actually spend more than you have in your checking account. So this goes back to why I have like a paycheck's worth of money in my checking account. I always make sure that my credit card payments are never actually going to, if I pay at any point in time, go beyond what I have in my checking account. And that guarantees that I never hit any of the issues with fees on credit cards.
Now, the issue with credit cards, of course, is that if you don't pay the full amount, you get the money you have left gets charged a percent fee. And usually that's around 25 to 30%, or sometimes higher. Now, I want to add just kind of some other thoughts here. So that I personally always pay my credit card off in full every month. Now, at the same time, even 30%, if you say, like, I want to buy this very special thing and I'm being thoughtful about it, and it is $500, and I know I'm not going to be able to pay that off full. Now, $500, 30%, you don't get charged 30% in one go. It's 30% annual. So if you didn't pay that, say, $500 for a full year, you'd be charged, you'd be accrue a 30% on top of that. Now, if you say, well, I can pay part of it this month and part of it next month, you're really not accruing very much in interest. And if money has a cost, right? Money has a cost. Money is not free. And if you want to buy something at this point in time for maybe your significant other's anniversary or something, credit cards can make a lot of sense. Because it's like, well, I'll pay, all total maybe 10% more. And you're like, well, you know what? I think that makes sense, because otherwise, if I just paid it with cash, I couldn't buy it. And so I will buy it and pay an extra 10% over the long run, over the 3 months it takes me to pay it off. It leverages, and that's the great thing with credit. Besides like point value and building your credit, the great thing with credit is that it allows individuals to buy one-off purchases. Now, people in America now do it too frequently, but the original thought was if you could buy one-off purchases that you couldn't afford by just having your cash flow, and then pay it off over a short period of time. Now, the nice thing with that is normally it's a loan, right? It's a loan. Now, normally when you have to take a loan, a consumer loan, a construction loan, you have to go through a whole loan application process. Mm-hmm. With a credit card, you don't do that. It's simple. It is swipe of the card and you've taken out a loan. Actually, you take out a loan every time you make a purchase with a credit card, but because you do apply for it, it's revolving credit when you open the card. But it is extremely easy to do, and that's a huge benefit. And for example, I have a low interest credit card. It's around 15% fee, annual fee on anything you don't spend or don't pay down. Now, right now I'm in the grace period. I just opened this card of 6 months. There's no cost to the credit. And I probably would never charge anything that I actually had to pay interest on. But if I did, if like there was a big disaster at my house, my insurance for some reason didn't cover it, and I didn't want to draw down my savings account, mm-hmm. I could charge it and then pay it off over 6 months. And maybe I'd pay 5% extra.
So do you have that credit card specifically in case of those kinds of emergencies?
Right.
That's why you have a low interest
credit card. It's a low interest credit card. Yeah. So it's like 15%, which is still very high.
Have you ever used it for anything?
I've used because I have 6 months right now with no interest because I opened it recently. So I put things on it. I put things on it right now that are larger, I call consumer capital expenses, like a lawnmower, like construction supplies, things that, not food. I would never charge like groceries or anything on it. It's like on my home improvement card for mm-hmm. construction materials. I will put on that card, or like nice furniture. I'll put on that card, like things you buy one time.
Yeah.
And then like I don't want to go buy, a $200 table with my normal credit card because it's like I don't really like, maybe if I want to put that in savings instead. So I will, charge it and then have, even if it were not interest free for the 6 months, $200 over, if I took 2 months to pay that off, for example, just hypothetically speaking here, it would cost me a fraction in interest. It wouldn't cost me very much to interest. So essentially what I'm saying is I'm willing to pay $5 extra to get that $200 piece of furniture now rather than in 2 months when I have the money saved. Yeah. So
no, and I think that's really interesting, and I think that mindset and perspective of how you gauge money in terms of like, okay, let's assess what the true impact of this interest rate is very intelligent, and it's really interesting to hear that you do that. I personally don't trust myself with not paying off a card, and so the personal philosophy that I've kind of taken on for myself is to never purchase anything, no matter how much I want it, if I don't have the money to pay off the credit card immediately at that period of time. Because that keeps me honest, that keeps me from making purchases that I truly can't afford, because sometimes in the moment it might feel like something is worth it or important, but in hindsight and retrospect it might not have been worth putting in that money at that given period of time if I didn't have that money to begin with. So a rule for myself that I've always kept is, and I think our circumstances are different, right, is to never pay for something unless I can actually pay off the card immediately at that point in time. And if there is something that I really want to get, if I want to get like a new table or a new laptop or that nice VR or whatever it is, I'm gonna make sure that I wait until I really have that money, and not just that money, but that money needs to exist while not impinging on my $3,000 buffer, right? Or my one paycheck buffer that I have for myself.
So that's very surprising for me because it's like a very conservative, it's an extremely conservative approach for someone who invests in Bitcoin.
Another way of saying it is that I can also afford to do that, right? A lot of people who maybe aren't making as much money can't afford to have the luxury of saying, okay, you know, I'm going to have this like massive buffer to guarantee myself. Or, okay, I can't purchase this right now, but hey, after this next paycheck, I will be able to. So I only have to wait another month or 2 weeks. And so it's not a big deal, right? Like maybe for some people, they don't have the luxury of being able to make the same kinds of conservative choices around their finances because they don't necessarily have as much money.
And that's the challenge. I mean, it is called consumer credit for a reason. It is to buy consumer goods that you may not have the money for immediately, so you need to have credit for it in the short term. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is we've started, and like things Steve described, I mean, like some people, like, you know, if you weren't as conservative, like a new table, that would be like something you would put on a credit card. You'd be willing to pay an extra $40 because you want that table now rather than 6 months from now, right? Like that's a cost that you're willing to accrue. But now people just like spend everything on their credit card. Like they put food on it and they put entertainment on it and they put everything on it, mm-hmm. but they don't pay the whole thing off. So you're financing your daily life. What you should use credit cards for, if you're going to use the financing aspect of them, is big ticket items.
That's to clarify. You're not saying don't use your credit card to buy your groceries and your lunches out.
But pay it off.
If you are doing that, make sure that you're going to pay it off.
Yeah,
right
exactly.
Away. Yeah.
If you're going to actually use your credit card and not pay it off, have it be because it's a big thing that you want right now, but you can pay off in 3 months. That's when you should use your credit card.
And only if you have a strategy for actually...
For how to pay it off, exactly.
Yeah.
Because that's the power of the credit card, in my opinion. I mean, the rewards are extra. Like, that's...
I've always gotten credit cards based on rewards. I've never even thought about that credit side because it's never even registered as an option for me.
Well, that's why they give you the rewards, so you do that. I mean, a lot of people don't, but many people do as well, is they don't pay the whole thing off and then they pay the bank.
Yeah.
The interest. So that was an interesting conversation because it's a different way of looking at credit in like a much more like, I think, true form, of like what it is at its core, but the perks are always great as well. I mean, if you're looking at, I have a card that is 1.5% back, and actually I have a Bank of America credit card, and I bank with Bank of America. And when I get to the point where I have $50,000 in liquid net assets, which I'm getting close to, and I transfer that to the Bank of America, they actually give me like 100% boost in the points I earn on the credit card. So essentially, instead of 1.5%, I earn 3% or very close to 3% on everything I buy. Now, if you think about that,
oh wow,
that's essentially negating inflation.
That's
by
really
not
good.
by not doing anything.
How do I get in on that?
It's not 100%. It's 75%. I think at the top end. The top end is 75%. At 50,000, it is 50%. I think it's 50% at 50,000. So I have a 1.5. 50% on top of that would be whatever. I have 1.75% back on everything I buy. Mm-hmm. And that is, I'm not going to go into why they do that. It's a marketing ploy essentially, but to get you to bank with Bank of America. But that's another power of the credit card is if you pick a good credit card, you can essentially what you're doing is a small percentage, but in effect, it's just negating inflation. So what I like to do with rewards is just put them straight into like savings. I get them in cash back.
Really?
I don't buy special things for myself.
I always use my rewards for flights.
If I'm going to buy the flight anyway,
yeah,
then I would use them. I don't use them for special things.
What I tend to find is that many cards will give you a better deal for converting the points into miles than they would for converting it straight to cash. In which case it makes more sense to just, fund any future travel that you have planned.
Right.
Through the cashback rewards. So I wanted to talk a little bit around philosophies of money. And so I was curious, kind of growing up, what was it like? What was the topic of money like in your household growing up?
My parents were both public servants, teacher. My dad worked for the Department of Transportation in Washington. And I think, but this was back when I asked them, it was probably mid-90s how much they made, and my dad said it's not a polite question. But I think he told me it was like 65. So I don't know what that would be today in inflation, but not a lot. I mean, more than I make now, but not much more than I make now. Mm-hmm. Maybe 75, 80. Yeah. So definitely middle class. Probably, upper class. Mm-hmm. Because that was 2-income household. My mom also made relatively the same. So it was $160,000 roughly a year. $150,000, something like that. Maybe
that's quite high for a household.
$140,000. I'm going down. I think $140,000 pre-tax is probably about what they made. But this is also, 2 parents, 2 kids, right? Yeah. It doesn't go that far. I make $70,000. It doesn't go that far, and I'm single. So we were always tight. We could do things. We could travel. We would go on trips, etc. But we didn't talk about money. I just knew that we weren't rich. We weren't poor. I felt very, very middle class American, which is unfortunately very much shrinking today. There's probably far fewer people in that stage, in that level that I was in today that can relate to that, which I think is really bad. It's really scary in many ways. But anyway, that's another conversation. So at the same time, this is the weird thing with my family. At the same time, my dad grew up in a very, very poor, or not very, very poor, a poorer family, probably lower middle class, maybe upper low income. Never quite sure. He doesn't talk about it. He had a challenging childhood, and lived in Washington. He still lives in Washington, small town Washington state. And my mom, she was born in Paris. Her dad was an executive in an oil company. Her mom didn't work. She had a nanny. And they lived in a very ritzy suburb of New York City. Wow. She traveled. She's been to Africa a couple times, the Philippines, visiting her father. She has artifacts she's brought back from there, back in the day, because he would travel. He would to for the oil companies. So definitely, wealthy family. And, the house on the vineyard, and Steve, that, but, all of these kind of things.
In case we haven't said before, Scott's family used to have a house in Martha's Vineyard, which they've sold in the last year.
To the Russians. Literally.
Was it a Russian family, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that. I really hope they don't tear it down. Because it's not like one of those Martha's... So I've been, right? And it's not like one of those Martha's Vineyard houses that you would expect when you think, okay, you go to Martha's Vineyard in the summer. It's like this small little house that was transported out of a time machine from the 40s or the 50s, and everything in it is smaller, right? It's like back then things used to be smaller. The armchairs are smaller. The doors are smaller. The kitchen
bathrooms,
and everything. And everything's just this small and patched up and fixed up. There's a shower outside.
Funniest thing, that house, and this explains a little bit, that house was built that way, purposefully. It was built as a summer cottage, before the vineyard was really popular. So it was never a year-round house. It was a summer place.
And it wasn't a McMansion.
Right, which didn't exist back then. I mean, if you look at the other houses around that age, they're all very similar to this house. Because it was like the vineyard was like a summer hangout for like weird granola hipster liberals of the 1940s. Like that's what it was.
Yeah.
Rich. And my grandmother who built the house, she sailed on the Queen Mary ocean liner and dined with the captain, and then she went back and forth. She was crazy. It's like wealth, a lot of wealth in that family. And then my mom, in the 70s, she grew up in the 70s, partly rejected all that. So I want to get away from this New England stuff, this stuffiness. And she moved to Washington State. She met my dad out kayaking. And so my family is this very odd mix of, a wealthy background. The money's gone now because it went somewhere. I don't have to go into that, but it's not here anymore. And then someone who grew up like rural and poor. And so I've always grown up with this perception of money as like it's always there in the background and you don't talk about it because that's very New England wealth. Like you have money, you don't talk about it.
Oh, interesting.
You don't talk about it. And you build that's why everyone, I'll wrap it up by saying this. Like that's why everyone at the vineyard hates, the people who've been there a long time, hates these McMansions. Because the really wealthy, old money in quotation marks, people, they build houses that are you couldn't tell someone who lived there was a multimillionaire. It just looks like a Joe Schmo house.
So does your family still have a lot of that money on your mom's side?
They don't, but I mean they're well off in retirement. The money went to a sibling who was developmentally challenged because she could never work for her whole life, so it all went to her in a trust fund. So all that money is, I mean, there's still she still references her dad's money, which is still there, and I think she draws it down for very specific things.
Yeah. So what I find interesting though is also like what the idea of spending money was like if you grow up within that mindset, right? And I'm curious about that. Like when you think about, okay, so where do we spend money? When is it appropriate? How do we view money when we spend it?
Well, a lot of this generation that my mom is from, that was a wealthy family that was there during the Great Depression. So you combine like a lot of money with the Great Depression. And they did okay, right? But they also saw how fragile wealth is.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, part of the ethos is this, we have this money, but it could disappear, but we don't want to draw attention to ourselves. We're just going to stash away there. Mm-hmm. And we'll live comfortably. But if we don't need it, we don't need it.
Yeah. That's
that is the mentality I was brought up in. There's some money there.
So you always have that safety net, but unless you really need it, you don't. You never have the stress of like the impending doom of the drying out of your savings. Like that never existed.
But you also don't live ostentatiously. It's just like because that would not be cool. Like, I'm saying that. It wouldn't be cool. Because, like, why are you showing off? It's cooler to, pretend like you don't have a lot of money. But, and this is the last thing I would say, there's so much around when I grew up around class. Mm-hmm. And class and money are different.
Oh, yeah.
I remember, like, this is how you put your silverware on the table. When you're done eating, put your silverware like this. Here's how you lay the napkin on your lap. When you're with adults, don't talk. I mean, it was very this is how you interact. This is how you dress. This is how other people dress. This is how you comport yourself in public. This is like what people do socially.
Yeah.
We go to cocktail hour.
I think it's interesting because we've talked about this before and how I might make more money than you right now, but you're definitely of a higher class than I am. Just socially, the way that we engage in this world.
Which is really fascinating. right?
Yeah. It's so my upbringing, there are parts that are similar, and yet it was a pretty different experience. So I grew up, a good portion of my time growing up was in Japan, and my mom's Japanese, and she grew up in a family that wasn't particularly wealthy, and she's quite old, and she grew up in another era. And so the combination of post-war Reconstruction Japan and not being not being terribly poor, but also not being very wealthy to begin with, I think produced the mindset of scarcity in my mom. And so growing up, my mom was always had this scarcity mentality around how you engage with money. Money was this fundamentally precious material, and for any day-to-day experiences, you have to try very, very hard to save it as much as you possibly can, because you never know when you might need that money. And to her credit, at the same time that she had that perspective, she had a juxtaposing perspective of when there are really valuable experiences, you should use that money. You should value it and see it as being useful for those cases. And so growing up, we were, full of contradictions. We would go, me and my mom and my brother would spend an entire Saturday going to 3 different grocery stores, because you had discounts on different things in each grocery store, and you would maybe save a few bucks or a few hundred yen by going to these various different places. And then after living that frugally, we would end up, once a year going on vacation somewhere, whether that's somewhere in Japan or in Hawaii or something like that. And so it was a really interesting kind of counterintuitive dynamic there. And my dad, on the other hand, was really just kind of unaware of the concept of money. So we had my dad worked, my mom didn't. Well, my dad still works, my mom still doesn't. So that's not really in past tense.
When is he retiring? For God's sake!
He's
never
going to retire.
I know.
There are financial reasons why.
I know.
I won't get into that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's a really traditional kind of like old school family. My dad has no understanding of finances whatsoever. My mom kind of manages all of it. She's always managed it with this scarcity mindset. And so growing up, that's always been really, really pervasive. And I kind of grew up thinking of money as this like fundamentally, intrinsically precious thing. And it's taking me a long time to shift away from that mindset. And to be perfectly honest, it's taken me having money to be able to move away from that mindset and be able to move away from thinking of how do I hoard as much money as possible, to seeing money as just another one of many tools that can improve experiences and can open up doors to new opportunities and possibilities. And being able to shift in that mindset, I know a lot of people talk about this, but it really is a significant change. It's a significant change in terms of the mental burden that the idea of financing has on you, and being able to see money as like, this is a tool when we need to use it to better our experiences, to open up opportunities, we should, and just be cognizant of like, don't waste it for the sake of wasting it.
Right.
That was a ramble, but I'm gonna grab a little bit more to drink. It's a terrible idea.
Just a touch. Okay, I am too.
Well, this is gonna be a bitch to edit. There's just so much shit in this law. All right. Keep running, and running, and running.
How much do you have? Oh, are you beatboxing? Steve, keep going. How much can you hold that up again? Oh, damn it.
It's so much. It's so
Okay,
much.
fine. I'll match you.
I'm very drunk. All right, what do you want to talk about now?
So, I mean, we can start wrapping it up slowly.
All right, where do you want to start trying to untangle this?
So I mentioned this earlier, and I don't know where. I'm happy I have this feeling, but I'm also a little frustrated at this, that I feel, and as I was peeing, I was thinking, I could feel guilty, or I could feel angry, and I don't. But I was trying to figure out what I felt, and I felt sad that, and this is going off topic, and I granted it's going off topic, but I think it's because I've worked now in government and dealt with people and dealt with systems that deal with people who are in such dire straits. And this is what, from when I wake up to when I go to bed, like, everything I do revolves around how do we improve the mobility and the success of other people. That I get to the point, like, is anyone doing well? Like, there's so many people who are struggling. Millions and millions and millions and millions. And you have conversations like this where it's like I set aside 30% of my income to savings. And I'm like, if we were to call this a podcast about finance, personal finance, it's really a podcast for personal finance, like seminar level. Because there's like 100, 200, 300, and 400 level that come before it. That, we're very lucky to be having this conversation.
Yeah, it almost feels like, is it fair for us to be discussing, okay, so you make this high level of income, where are you going to take it, and which accounts are going to give you specific yields, and like, what is your tax going to be when you're getting earnings and all that, and then at the same time there are all these people who are struggling to even make their rent, pay their gas for their car, and we're here flippantly talking about like, yeah, so I take all of this extra money that I have because I can afford to have extra money because I happen to be lucky enough to be in this situation, and I put it in these specific accounts that give me these returns and blah, blah, blah.
But I will say, I feel no semblance of guilt. I have no white guilt. I have no guilt of any kind. Because this is how this country should be. And while I don't feel guilty, and I don't think I should. I don't think I should, and I don't think you should, Steve. And I don't think you do. That this, I think one of the challenges is with finance, with personal finance, with success. One, they're so intricately intertwined, and I think that's pretty obvious to anyone who's, it's viscerally intertwined, it's emotionally intertwined. And it used to be for a good reason, because by and large, well, I won't say that. I would say much more so than today, you could gauge someone's hard work off of how much they made, or how much they made based off of their hard work. Now, I'm not saying it was ever an absolute, because it wasn't, but much more so than today. That if you saw someone who had a lot of money, you could say that person worked really hard to get that. More, and you would be more right than if you said that today.
Yes.
And I think there is still a feeling that we should be able to say that truthfully, that person who worked that hard, who got that much money, They just worked for it. And that is so untrue today in most cases that is one of the frustrations, and there are many frustrations, but one of the frustrations that we have in this country and where the political system is going to shit is that people feel like they should be making more money, but they're not. And there are some lucky people who are generalists, such as myself, who could essentially do anything. And there are people who are in very high demand industries, such as Steve with programming, that we are rewarded. Now, Steve is rewarded more than I am, but we're both rewarded for our abilities. But that person who can do skill A extremely well is not, because there's a glut of supply, because of outsourcing, slightly because of automation, happenstance of the market, and it just has happened like this. I mean, there's no reason that person has not worked, is not any less intelligent, could be more intelligent, probably is more intelligent than I am. And it just is by gift or curse of birth, wound up in that path. And I think I'm not guilty, because I think there's no sense in being guilty around a system that has been set up in this way by everyone acting in it. And I think white guilt is the stupidest thing ever. That's another topic for another podcast. But it does make me sad. And that's what I realized while I was peeing, is it makes me sad that some people can talk about personal finance at the seminar level, and some people can talk about personal finance on the intro level, and yet both started from the same spot and both worked just as hard. And that is saddening for me.
I agree with that. I also think the idea of education around personal finance is something that really hasn't pervaded into our educational structure and our systems. And so oftentimes, even basic concepts of get a credit card and pay it off in full every time, or this is how to set up an automated transfer so that you're taking $10 every month and you're putting it away, or the philosophy around this is a cool way to spend your money, invest it, hold on to it, save it because of the value.
Right.
This is what compound interest is. These concepts, these ideas are just not taught in school. And so what you have are cultural divides and socioeconomic divides as well, which compound on the kinds of inequities and inequalities that we have in our society around how people manage money. Many people just don't grow up having an understanding of how to save money, right? So if you are, as Scott said, given an unlucky draw of the dice where your skills don't align with the market and how it determines value, and your culture hasn't taught you how to save what you do have and compound on it so that you have a sustainable future and finances that are going to propel you into your next stage of life, then you've really gotten the short end of the stick, and it's really hard to think of how you can fix that, because it's not a fair system. Both Scott and I were very lucky to be granted the opportunities we were to both have the money to get the education that we needed, to get the jobs that we have, and have the background, culture, and familial support to have training around how to manage the money when we got it. And so I think there definitely is a deeper structural societal issue around how do we educate people to be able to handle their money, and that conversation is just not happening, and that's not being integrated into our education properly. Right. Even though it is You take an economics class and they talk about obscure concepts of macroeconomics, and it's like,
That's
hey,
policy. That's about policy.
the first economics class you should have is how do you handle a credit card? How do you budget? How do you take the money in your wallet and make sure you have enough left over for your basic necessities? Like, that should be economics 101. And for some reason, we talk about obscure shit and then eventually talk about Roth IRAs when a lot of people can't even figure out how to open a credit card. It's ridiculous. So,
well, I think it's part of it is twofold. One, I mean, part. There's a lot of other reasons too that you named, but two that came to mind is one. People are just making less money relative to inflation, and so these topics are that much more important now than they were 30 years ago because scarcity has increased. So that's one of many reasons. The second reason I can think of, again of many, is that with the rise of, computer science, I will say, with a very, very broad stroke, but data analytics more specifically, allow financial institutions to maximize profits off of individuals in ways that are much more intelligent than they used to be. So that slice of the pie is going more and more and more to the financial institutions because they can understand how to market and what type of products to develop to encourage people to essentially transfer more of their money to the banking institutions and others and companies and everything than it used to be.
Well, they're monetizing previously unmonetizable elements of the economy. They're monetizing the behaviors of individuals that they can track through new data that they can capture, which was previously unmonetizable, and there's no system right now for individuals to remonetize it.
Exactly.
Which means that there's this free resource, untapped resource that is being leveraged for greater inequality and being utilized by a small number of corporations.
I just heard this story. I was listening to this 4 hours ago. There was, and we're getting a little off topic here, but this is a story related to personal finance, is there was a woman who was on Facebook, or maybe it was her cable network, watching it on her computer, and an ad popped up for this online game that you can download as an app or play on Facebook. It's like a casino game. And she was bored, and she thought, well, you know what, maybe I'll download and try that. And it turned out it was a complete scam. She lost $500,000 on it. She became
$500,000.
She became addicted to it. It was a gambling game, but you couldn't actually earn money from it.
Oh God.
She became medically addicted to it. Her and many, many other people. And one of the reasons that's so successful is that company can know that, okay, well, based on market research, and again, this is just one very specific example, and I think it's an illustrative point, we think that kind of elderly women who are approaching retirement, might be kind of bored, looking for kind of social connections, could fall prey to this kind of thing. And that is the exact demographic we're going to target. You couldn't used to, the data that informed that decision one, that may be a vulnerable market, and the ability to target that market so specifically has not existed before.
Yeah.
And this is an extreme example. Granted, it is an extreme example. But I think it is a great example of them looking at the pie, assets, companies looking at the, and say, how can I maximize my grab of that assets? And what demographic and how do I target them in a way that I can maximize? Now, this is a very pessimistic view, and again, it's an extreme view of one specific instance that's not common, but that type of thinking occurs all the time. Right? From a benign startup to a Fortune 500. That's the type of thinking that is occurring. That could have occurred 30 years ago, but the technology was not there to allow it to occur.
Yeah. Man, that is such an interesting story. I don't think we have time to get into that right now.
It's pretty fascinating. I mean,
unfortunately, but at least it's good to know that we have many topics for the future that we can keep pulling out of our ass. So, do you have any final words? Final advice?
I think this has been a really wide-ranging topic, as all of our topics are. And I think if you had to boil it down to one of many points, you could say that, Steve and I are lucky. We're able to talk about personal finance in this way, and that there are some universal truths about personal finance. Generally, unsexy is good. Don't take risks, and do your research. And don't assume the thing that is marketed to you is always the right thing to buy or to invest in. And I think both of us have generally followed that advice pretty closely. At the same time, I also think that many different people have many different circumstances, and as illustrated with the credit card story, you may have a specific instance where you need to make a big purchase, or you may have a specific financial situation that warrants a very different answer. And I think one of the challenges with personal finance is that it's taken as a law and not as general advice. And if someone says something in personal finance, everyone should follow that advice. And that's not the case. It depends on where you are in life. It depends on your financial situation. It depends on your goals. And it depends on your values. And all of those factor into what decisions you make, let alone the amount of money you make, which is very real. So Steve and I have offered a clip of our perspective on this based on where we are, and I think we've talked a little bit about how we see this applying to other people as well and the challenges that we're therein. But I think it also shows that this is how we view it, but there's also many, many other ways to view it as well. That is what I'll say.
That was great. So we will have a little bit of a break. I have a few trips going out, but hopefully we'll have next podcast up soon. See you next whenever.
3 weeks maybe.
Something like that. All right.
All right. Bye-bye.